Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. Tonight, I bring you 8 encounters from deep within the Appalachian wilds where trails twist in on themselves, where familiar voices call from the wrong direction, and where some who enter are followed back out. Changed. These aren't legends, they're traces, left behind in journals, photos, burnt soil, and memories that no longer line up. If these stories find something in you, consider subscribing and share what followed you home. Now hush, the woods are listening. My name is Caleb Dunn. I was 29 at the time, a geological surveyor contracted for underground mapping across the Appalachian interior. Late October found me in West Virginia, just east of Elkins, charting an unmapped cave system known locally as Crooked Vein. No official trail reached the mouth, just the faint remains of old miner footpaths, buried under decades of rot and moss. Locals claimed the cave ran deep and crooked, splitting like veins through the mountainside, though no one could say how far it went. They spoke of it quietly, like something not meant to be disturbed. The wind that morning was dead still, the air so quiet my boots seemed to echo off trees. I hiked in with minimal gear, a headlamp, an analog compass, 2 chemical lights, and a backup flashlight. The cave itself was a slit in the rock, jagged like something torn rather than formed. It yawned downward, steep and narrow, no carvings or signs of man. Just limestone and shadow, swallowing daylight whole. It started subtle. First, the sound of pebbles shifting behind me, as if something was catching up. I'd stop, hold my breath, listen, nothing. But every time I moved forward, it felt like something just beyond earshot moved too, always slower, always matching. I told myself it was runoff or my own nerves. The deeper I went, the harder that was to believe. Half an hour in, I heard it. My name, Caleb. Soft, like breath through damp cloth, echoing up from below. It stopped me cold. I turned and shined my light back, caught only empty stone. I stood there for what felt like minutes, heart locked behind my ribs, waiting for something to finish that sentence. But silence returned, thick and absolute. I marked my path in chalk and pressed on. The tunnel widened into a small chamber, maybe 15 feet across. In the far corner, resting upright on the stone, was a mining lamp, old-fashioned, brass and soot-covered, but its glass was unbroken, and it was lit burning a soft blue flame. I hadn't brought matches. No one else was scheduled to be here. I backed away slowly, marking the direction of the tunnel behind me. As I did, I noticed something stranger still on the cave wall. Near my last chalk mark was a set of initials, C.D., same as mine. Beneath it, a date scratched into the wall, October 26th. Today's date. But the surface of the limestone was dry, weathered, as if the etching had been there for years. From that moment on, the cave changed. Angles felt wrong. My light seemed to dim, even though the battery read full. And then I heard it again, my name. This time repeated, once from behind and once from ahead. I turned in both directions and saw only black. I tried to head back, but my compass spun. No matter where I stood, it pointed toward me, like the cave itself had become its own direction. I reached for my backup light, gone. The pouch it had been in was open, the zipper undisturbed. There were boot prints in the dust, my size, my tread. But they were heading deeper into the cave than I had gone. I followed them, each step slower than the last, until they simply stopped. No scuff marks, no backtrack, just vanished. That's when I noticed the breathing. Not mine. Something deeper in the dark, slow and steady, matching rhythm to my own, like it was learning me. I spoke who's there and heard it answered in a whisper that mirrored my voice. Not just words, but tone, mocking, familiar. And still, I kept going. The tunnel curved left, then down and down again, until the air felt colder than it had any right to be. My breath fogged in the beam of my headlamp, and the stone beneath my boots began to feel damp and soft, like flesh left too long in water. I tried to mark the walls again, but the chalk wouldn't catch it, just smeared, as if the rock had become slick. I told myself it was condensation, but the smell rising from the surface said otherwise, something old and coppery, something like rusted teeth. That's when I noticed the sound again, a low shuffle, deliberate, staying just at the edge of the circle of light. I stopped and waited, heart in my throat, listening to silence stretch thin. Then came a whisper, not from ahead or behind, but from above. I snapped my light upward and saw nothing, only smooth stone. But when I lowered it, there was a second shadow beside mine. Not longer, not shorter, identical. It disappeared the moment I moved, as if it had never been there. I laughed, short and forced, just to break the silence. But the sound echoed back from too many angles, like the cave itself was remembering me. At some point, I found a fork I didn't remember passing before. The right-hand path sloped upward slightly. The left dropped into a pit of black so deep my light couldn't find the bottom. I took the right, almost running now, breath fast, skin damp with fear I wasn't ready to name. After 10 minutes of walking, I passed the same brass mining lamp still burning, same soft blue flame. I hadn't turned around. I was sure of it. I retraced my steps with my eyes and found my initials again on the cave wall. The date still fresh, but now a second set beneath it. Same initials, same date, but in a different handwriting. I reached into my pack and pulled out my map, not to check it, but to prove I had one. But it wasn't my map. Same folded creases, same topographic labels, but every mark I'd made in pencil was gone. Instead, there were black ink lines tracing a path deeper into the cave, leading to a point marked simply, "Here." I hadn't written it. I dropped the map and turned, only to find the path behind me, narrowing, the stone pressing inward, almost pulsing like it was breathing. That's when the voices began to layer. Not just mine now, but others, whispering different names. Caleb, Marcus, Joanne. The voices would call a name. Wait, then call again in a sharper tone, as if scolding someone for not answering. I covered my ears, but the sound crawled inside, as if it had nothing to do with hearing. Something brushed against my boot and I kicked backward, nothing. But a second pair of footprints now ran beside mine, slightly off step, like someone mimicking me with just enough delay to be noticed. I tried to run, stumbling upward, light flickering. The passage widened, then opened into another chamber, this one lined with what looked like roots, but too pale, too fine. They hung from the ceiling and pulsed gently, dripping fluid into a basin-like depression in the floor. I didn't step closer. I couldn't. On the far wall, scratched deep into the rock, were the words, "You've been here before." I hadn't. I couldn't have. Yet beside it, in smudged red, dried or fresh, I don't know, was a single handprint. Same size as mine. Something moved beyond the roots. A figure, tall and still, half seen through the dripping strands. I raised my light, and it flickered out. All I had left was the faint glow from the mining lamp, which now rested beside my boot. The breathing grew closer, more urgent. I backed toward the tunnel, but the passage was no longer where I came from. Every exit looked the same, and from every direction, I heard footsteps, slow, steady, matching mine. I ran. I don't remember choosing a tunnel, I just ran. Time fractured after that. I remember waking up in the tree line above the cave, covered in mud, my boots on the wrong feet, my name scratched into both palms with something sharp. My compass was gone, the map too. But the brass lamp sat beside me, flame long since dead. I never went back. And I never answered when I heard my name whispered in dreams, even though sometimes it came in my own voice. It was just past midnight when my engine died on a lonely stretch of the Blue Ridge Parkway. I'd been driving north from Asheville, heading to visit my cousin in Shenandoah, and the GPS had long since given up. The road curved sharply at what the locals called Curve 17, and as I coasted to a stop on the shoulder, I noticed the strange silence. No crickets, no wind, just the low hum of cooling metal. I turned the key again. Nothing. Not even a click. My phone had no signal. And when I looked up, the fog had already begun to gather. My name's Marla Jean, 34, registered nurse, used to night shifts and long drives. But something about that place made me feel like a child again, alone, small, and watched. I told myself it was nerves. I'd only just passed a small overlook 10 minutes earlier. Worst case, I could walk back and flag someone down by morning. I switched off the headlights to conserve the battery, cracked the window, and leaned back in the seat to wait. That's when I saw her. She was standing in the center of the road, maybe 30 feet ahead of the car. White dress, long black hair. I thought she might be a hitchhiker at first, or someone injured. But she didn't move, didn't gesture, didn't even seem to breathe. I turned on the headlights again, and she was gone. The road was empty, just fog and asphalt and the curling edge of the mountain beyond. I locked the doors then. I'm not usually the superstitious type. But something about the way she vanished, it wasn't natural. I checked the rear view, and my heart caught. There was a smear on the back window, like a hand had dragged wet fingers in a downward arc. I hadn't heard anything touch the car, and I was sure that all the windows had been clean when I parked, trying to calm myself. I turned on the radio, hoping for static or a signal, anything instead. I got silence. No hum, no buzz, just dead air. But a few seconds later, I thought I heard something low in the background. A whisper. I leaned in. It was my name. Marla. Soft, drawn out, as if spoken right against the microphone, but from behind me. I jumped and spun around, but the back seat was empty. I threw open the door, stepped into the fog, and immediately regretted it. The cold hit like a slap, and the fog was thicker than it looked from inside. I couldn't see more than a few steps in any direction, but then faint footsteps on pavement, approaching slow and uneven, like someone limping. I called out, "Hello, are you okay? Do you need help?" Silence again. Then, from behind the car, a reply in my own voice, "Are you okay?" It echoed just wrong, like it was played from a worn-out tape. I bolted back into the car and slammed the door. My hands were shaking. That's when I saw the face in the driver's side mirror. Pale, featureless, just a blur. But it tilted as I did, as if watching. I couldn't stay. I didn't care if the engine was dead. I turned the key again. To my surprise, the engine sputtered, then roared back to life. The headlights flicked on, cutting through the fog. But there was something now on the road ahead. A white figure, walking away, very slowly, in the exact middle of the lane. I thought about backing up, but the mirror showed her again, closer this time. I gripped the wheel, floored the gas, and the car lunged forward. The figure didn't turn or run, just vanished again the second I passed the curve. And just like that, the fog cleared, the road was dry, the stars were out. My phone buzzed back to life with a voicemail notification. It was blank. Just 63 seconds of my name being repeated over and over again. In my voice. I didn't stop driving for the next hour. My hands ached from how tight I gripped the wheel. But I didn't dare slow down until I saw a gas station near Rockfish Gap. The lights were flickering, the kind of place that looked abandoned even when open. But I pulled in anyway. The woman at the counter gave me a curious glance when I asked if she'd ever heard of Curve 17. "Ain't no 17, she said without looking up. "The curves don't go that high, not officially." I didn't argue. I just bought coffee and sat in my car with the engine running, staring at the edge of the woods. Back in Shenandoah, I tried to put it behind me. Sleep came hard, and when it did, the dreams came harder, always the same road, the same voice, the same fog creeping beneath my skin like mold. I stopped listening to voicemails entirely. I had 8 new ones by the 3rd day, all from my number, all blank except for breathing and, in the final seconds, that whisper, "Answer me." I played them once, then deleted them. But they came back every night at the same time. 2:17 a.m. One night, I caved and answered the call. The line was silent at first, and then came static long, high-pitched, until I nearly dropped the phone. "Then you left something behind." A pause. "Look in the mirror." I did. Nothing behind me, just my dark room. But the phone screen showed something else. A faint shape just to the left of my reflection. A white shoulder. A face that wasn't fully formed. I turned to check. The room was empty. But I could feel it now. That cold, pressed silence from the parkway. I drove back the next week. I don't know what I expected, maybe to reclaim something, maybe to prove I wasn't losing my grip. I left early, mid-afternoon, wanting to see Curve 17 in daylight. But the closer I got, the more the air thickened, like the mountains were holding their breath. I passed mile markers that didn't match the map. Curve 14, 15, 16, then a sharp bend that wasn't on any record. I slowed, and there it was, Curve 17. The trees on both sides leaned inward, unnaturally so, as if they were listening. The car died again. Same place, same soundless click. But this time, I didn't get out. I sat and watched the road. watching the fog creep low across the asphalt. And slowly, she stepped out again. The same white dress, same hair. Only now I could see her eyes. They weren't hers. They were mine. A perfect match, staring into me like she'd borrowed them for just this moment. She reached toward the car. I tried to move, but my limbs locked. The window fogged from the outside, then cleared in a perfect circle, like someone was looking in. I don't remember opening the door. I don't remember stepping onto the pavement. But the cold beneath my feet told me I had. She was right in front of me now, and when she smiled, it was my smile. Crooked, slight, familiar. She said only this: "You followed yourself here." I must have blacked out. When I woke up, the sun was rising. I was lying in the driver's seat. Door ajar, engine cold. My phone was in my lap with a new voicemail. I didn't need to listen. I already knew the voice. I just drove away. Slower this time, not looking in the mirror. I haven't been back since. But every now and then, when I take a curve too sharply, I see fog where there should be sun, and I hear my name. Always just once. Always just behind me. My name's Joel Mason. I turned 42 the week I took that job. Just me, my pack. And a week alone at an old fire lookout deep in the hills near Cold Brush, Kentucky. The forestry department needed someone to monitor atmospheric pressure and report signs of early season wildfires. I thought the solitude would suit me. I was wrong. The place sat at the edge of a high ridge, surrounded on all sides by black pine and bramble, so thick you couldn't see more than a few feet into the tree line. They told me it was built on the bones of a mining town that burned down in 1919. Nothing left now but a rusted bell tower and a 2-room station built in the 60s. The bell was the first thing I noticed. No rope, no mechanism. Just a steel-cast relic hanging in the air. Black with time. Cracked down the center. It hadn't rung in decades, they said. Still, I couldn't help but glance at it every time I passed the window. The lookout cabin creaked in the wind, and the whole place smelled of damp wood and coal dust. I unpacked my things, set my journal on the desk, and tried not to think about the stories I'd heard about the people who vanished up here during snow years. About how the fire tower's foundation was poured over the old town cemetery. The first night was uneventful, save for the constant static on the radio and the strange lack of wind. At 1:13 a.m., the bell rang once, just once. I thought maybe it was an animal. Wind catching a remnant of chain, anything but what it felt like a call. I stepped out onto the catwalk and shined my flashlight toward the tower. Nothing moved, but the pine needles had shifted below in a spiral pattern, as if something had circled the tower counterclockwise in the dark. The second night, it rang again. Same time. One long note that felt like it sank into my chest. I wrote it off again, tried to distract myself by reading old logbooks left behind in the desk drawer. Most were mundane weather, wildlife, notes about faulty wiring. But one entry, from 1987, stood out. It simply read, "Do not answer the bell. It remembers." The handwriting was eerily similar to mine. I ran my fingers over the page, half expecting the ink to smear. It didn't. By the third night, I felt watched. The feeling pressed against me no matter where I sat inside the cabin. I'd look up from my journal and catch the shape of a face in the window, only to find it was the reflection of a lantern, or the bend of light through warped glass. but each time I checked the logbook. The latest entry was written differently. Slight changes, words swapped, the warnings got longer. It watches what you write. Don't write your name. That night, I locked every door and slept with the radio on. At 1:13 a.m., the bell didn't just ring, it sang. A deep, droning vibration that filled the walls and settled into the floor. The radio crackled, then cut off. I sat up, heart racing, and saw the cabin's compass spinning lazily on the desk. I reached for it, and the needle froze, pointing not north, but directly at the bell tower. Something thudded softly against the wall outside. Then again, closer to the door. I tried to steady my breathing, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. When I stood to look out the peephole, there was nothing there, no animal, no shadow, just the stillness. But when I turned around, my journal had moved. It sat open to a page I hadn't written yet. And in handwriting identical to mine were the words, "You left the door unlocked last night." I checked the lock again. It was still latched. But the window beside it was open a crack, just enough to let in the cold. And on the sill, pressed into the dust, was a handprint, same size as mine. I didn't sleep after that. I sat at the desk with the lamp burning low. The journal closed tight under my palm. Every creak in the floor, every groan in the walls felt like breath held too long. At some point before dawn, I must have nodded off, because I woke to find the lamp cold and the sky outside still pitch black. The clock read 1:13 a.m. Again. But this time, the bell hadn't rung. Instead, from the woods below, came the sound of soft steps, slow, deliberate, making their way toward the tower. Not fast, not frantic, just steady, like something that knew exactly where it was going. I stayed low and peeked out through the bottom corner of the window. There was no one there. But the pine needles had shifted again this time in a perfect spiral right beneath the cabin. I thought about the old mining town, the stories of workers buried alive, of families who never made it out when the fire came. I wondered how long their voices had lingered, if they had ever really left. Something about the bell, I knew now, had been built to keep something in, not call someone out. And somehow, I had broken whatever silence kept it asleep. By daylight, the woods looked normal again. But when I stepped outside, I found something sitting at the bottom of the tower stairs, my journal, open to a fresh page. I hadn't brought it out with me, written in my hand, though I had no memory of doing it. Was a map drawn in quick, sharp lines. It showed the lookout, the bell tower, and a small cross deep in the trees marked orphan. Beneath that, a single sentence. Don't let it ring again. I don't know what made me follow it. Guilt, maybe curiosity, some strange obligation that didn't feel like my own. The trees thickened quickly, and within minutes, the tower was gone from view. But the forest felt smaller out here, like it folded around me. I passed 3 stones sunk deep into the ground, none with names, all marked with a faint crescent scratched into the surface. The map led true. I found the cross exactly where it had shown, nailed to a dead pine at the base of a shallow mound. Beneath it, half buried in dry leaves, was a bell, not metal, wood carved, smoothed old. The handle was broken and blackened, like it had been through fire. I reached for it, and something whispered not a word. just a hush, like breath moving against bone. I pulled my hand back. Then, from behind me, the crunch of leaves. I turned, and for a second, I saw myself standing there. Same clothes, same boots, same tired face. But the eyes were wrong empty, watching. And just like that, the thing stepped back into the woods and vanished. I returned to the tower in a haze. The bell rang again that night. I didn't hear it with my ears, but I felt it in my spine, like it had settled into me. The journal began writing itself, pages filling in as I turned them. Memories I hadn't lived. Entries dated from decades ago. All of them signed J.M. I stopped trying to make sense of time. The clock always read 1:13, no matter when I looked. The compass spun like it was caught in a breath. On my final day, I heard footsteps on the roof. I didn't check. I just sat and waited. Journal in my lap, hands steady. Something knocked once against the trap door above the bed. Then silence again. When I looked down, the last entry had finished writing itself. We are the echo. You are the bell. That night, I left. I didn't pack. I didn't lock the cabin. I just walked down the ridge until the forest let me out. I never told anyone what happened. But a week later, a package arrived at my apartment with no return address. Inside was the wooden bell. It doesn't ring, not allowed. But every night since, at exactly 1:13 a.m., I feel something pressing behind the mirror, watching, waiting. They told us the trail was simple looping, marked, just shy of 3 miles, used mostly by students and seasonal rangers. But from the first step into Sorrel Valley, I knew something wasn't right. The light shifted wrong here, like it filtered through a second layer of trees the eye couldn't fully see. My name's Malik Rivera, 23 biology major at UT Chattanooga. I was out here on a 2-day solo field study for my ecology course, tasked with logging fungal growth and taking soil pH samples along designated plots. I had my GPS, my compass, my gear, everything I needed to be safe, everything I thought would matter. I marked the first mile, easily snapped photos, logged samples, even stopped to eat under a hemlock that buzzed with hidden cicadas. But after lunch, I realized the path ahead looked familiar. Not like déjà vu, I recognized it. Same split route, same fallen branch I'd cleared earlier. I turned around, thinking I'd missed a fork. But the way back looked identical too. Only the shadows had reversed light now coming from behind me. My GPS said I'd gone further into the valley, but the terrain looped as if I'd never left a single clearing. I kept walking. The markers I'd left, strips of orange flagging tape tied to saplings, were gone. Everyone. I should have panicked then, but I didn't. Not until I checked the soil sample I took 15 minutes earlier. And the label read, Plot hash 1, 3:17 p.m. It was 2:40 p.m. now. Somehow, I'd already returned to a point in the future, or the sample had been switched. I pulled out my compass. It spun once, then locked, pointing directly at me. Even as I turned in place, I retraced my steps again, circling back to a stretch of trail marked with deep boot prints. My size, my tread. I stopped, knelt, touched the edge of one. Still damp, fresh, but facing the wrong direction, leading further into the woods, not away. That's when I felt it, the heavy pause of the air behind me, as if something had been moving and suddenly froze. I turned, but nothing was there, just the hum of insects. but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it had stopped when I did. I walked fast after that. Too fast. Branches whipped at my face, and the trail disappeared entirely, no matter how far I moved. The clearing came again, the same gnarled tree with the hollow notch shaped like an eye. I passed it once, then again. On the third pass, there was something inside the hollow, my flagging tape, tied into a tight knot. It hadn't just vanished. It had been taken and returned. I spoke out loud then, maybe to break the silence, maybe because I hoped someone was out there. "Hello," I said. "Is anyone here?" The answer came 2 seconds later. In my own voice, "Is anyone here?" Not a true echo. The pitch was wrong. Too flat. Like someone repeating the words after memorizing them phonetically. The sound came from the trees behind me. Night came fast. Too fast for October. I didn't have time to pitch my tent. So I pulled out my emergency blanket and sat with my back to a rock wall, facing open ground. The forest stayed unnaturally quiet. I tried to write in my journal, but my pen was missing. When I flipped through the pages, a new entry had appeared dated tomorrow. It read, "Don't stop walking. It walks when you rest." Beneath it, a small smudge of mud shaped like a bare foot, smaller than mine, closer to a child's. By then, the woods weren't just still, they were listening. I whispered to myself to stay calm, but even that felt like too much. Every sound I made came back to me, slightly altered, as if someone or something was practicing my voice. I closed my eyes just once, maybe a minute. When I opened them, there was a new boot print in the dirt beside mine. Facing me, and carved into the bark of the tree I leaned against, were 3 vertical slashes fresh, deep, and still weeping sap. Whatever was in this forest didn't want me lost. It wanted me moving. At some point in the early morning, I gave up trying to figure out direction. The compass had gone dead. The GPS blinked in and out like it couldn't agree on where I stood, and the trees seemed to shift behind me when I wasn't looking. I walked with one hand brushing the bark, just to feel something real. But even that felt wrong. Some trunks were cold as bone. Others pulsed faintly beneath my fingers like a heartbeat buried in wood. The trail didn't loop anymore. It folded. I'd turn left and end up back where I started. Except now the trees leaned in a different direction, and my footprints were already there. Like I was chasing something a step ahead wearing my own boots. I found the creek again around mid-morning. I knew it was the same one because of the split rock with the moss that looked like a handprint. Only now, a piece of my gear was there. My soil sample bag, tied around a branch, swaying like a marker. I hadn't left it. I hadn't even noticed it missing. Inside was a folded page torn from my field journal. It had a drawing I didn't remember making, an overhead sketch of the woods, with small X's marking paths. Most had been crossed out in red ink. Only one remained unmarked, leading to a symbol I didn't recognize, 3 downward arrows in a circle. Beneath it, in my handwriting, the words, "This time, don't stop." Something had been watching me longer than I realized. Not just from the woods, but through them, like the trees themselves were lenses, refracting back versions of me I hadn't lived yet. That night, I tried to rest near a boulder marked with carvings worn, shallow spirals that made my teeth ache when I touched them. I awoke not where I'd slept, but upright, walking. Halfway down a slope I didn't remember climbing, like my body had moved without me. When I checked my journal again, The last entry was written with my hand, but in a tighter, sharper script. "You walk in its pattern now." I spoke less after that. My voice echoed back wrong, and sometimes not at all, when I did hear it. The response would come not just from behind, but from above, high in the canopy, like something perched and learning the rhythm of my breath. The forest wasn't trying to trap me. It was learning me, building a route that matched my fears, my steps, even my doubt. Every time I thought I'd outsmarted the loop, a new landmark appeared. Once, I found a torn sleeve of my own jacket nailed to a tree. Another time, a water bottle from my pack still full, cap sealed, resting neatly on the stump I'd never seen. I finally broke into open ground just past dusk. A clearing with a single, half-rotted bench and an old trail marker sunk halfway into the soil. Ranger Route 7. Closed. The paint had peeled, but the letters still held. There were boot prints around it, not just mine, but several overlapping, all facing different directions. I sat on the bench, exhausted, trying to orient myself. That's when I heard someone walking the perimeter of the clearing. Slow, careful, my steps mirrored with just a half-second delay. I didn't move. I waited. When I looked up, across the clearing, I saw myself. Or something close. Same jacket, same build. It tilted its head, just slightly, like it was considering which of us was real. Then it stepped back into the woods. No sound, no broken branches, just gone. I stood and followed the trail it had left, not out of courage, but because it had pointed the way forward, maybe the only honest direction I'd been given. I stumbled onto a service road sometime near dawn, filthy, ragged, and shaking. A ranger picked me up 2 miles down, said I looked like I'd been out there a week. I checked my watch. It still read the day I entered, October 14th, but my phone, once it got signal, displayed a different truth. October 23rd, 9 days gone, and in my gallery a photo I didn't take. A picture of me, sleeping under that spiral-carved boulder, taken from high above. I came to Clary Ridge for the eclipse. I'd photographed 5 already in different parts of the country. But this one, the October shadow over Virginia, was supposed to be different. Something about the way the light fell in through the mountain clefts. How the trees shifted their shape in silhouette. It was the kind of obscure folklore that drew me in. Things whispered about in ranger posts and gas stations, how birds go silent and shadows stretch wrong. My name's Beth Ann Kessler. I'm 31 freelance photographer, mostly landscapes and celestial oddities. I thought I'd be alone up there with my camera. But I wasn't. The ridge was steep, the trail faint, barely more than an overgrown hunting path. I reached the summit 2 hours before the eclipse, set up my tripod, calibrated the lenses, checked for cloud interference. Everything looked perfect. But the first photo I took before anything even began was wrong. It showed the scene as it was: trees, ridge, distant hills. But in the frame, just to the left of my setup, was a figure standing, still. Same color jacket I wore, same stance. It looked like me, but I hadn't hit the timer. I was looking through the viewfinder when it happened. I deleted the photo, thinking it was some odd reflection, a lens ghost. Took another. This one was clean. For a moment, I felt the tightness in my chest ease. Then I turned to pick up my thermos, and there it was again. A figure, just past the tree line, far enough to blur, but facing me, not moving, not there a moment ago. I blinked and it was gone. That was when I noticed the carving's three eyes etched into the bark of a nearby birch tree. Not stylized, anatomically correct. Each pupil drilled deep into the wood. The eclipse began just after 3:00 p.m. The sky dimmed. The air cooled fast, and everything went silent. Birds stilled, insects vanished. But I didn't hear the hush most people describe. I heard whispering, like wind curling through a locked room. I couldn't make out words, but I knew it wasn't my imagination. It circled around the ridge, low and rhythmic, like someone pacing just beyond sight. As the eclipse reached totality, I snapped burst photos, one every 3 seconds. The final shot in the sequence made my throat tighten. It showed me not standing, but sitting on the ground, facing the camera, hands in my lap, head tilted. But I never moved. I was still upright. The shutter had clicked with my eye on the glass. I dropped the camera and scanned the ridge. Nothing. But the feeling of being watched swelled so hard it made my legs shake. I tried to pack up. My hands wouldn't cooperate. Every time I zipped the case, I found it unzipped again seconds later, like I'd imagined sealing it. I looked at my camera's SD card display, still full. No deletions. But the gallery showed duplicates, photos I hadn't taken, slightly different angles, as if someone stood just to my left and mimicked every shot a second after me. Each one with a tiny black smudge near the lower corner, always in the same place. Always shaped like an eye. Night fell quickly. The light didn't return like it should have. I stayed too long, trying to convince myself to rationalize what I saw. But when I checked my compass to find the trail down, the needle spun once, then locked not north, but dead center on the eye-carved birch. And in the bark, a new carving had appeared. Not an eye, a face, my face. I left the tripod behind. My camera, too. I just wanted to get off the ridge. But every few hundred feet, the trees seemed to shift. Landmarks I'd marked on the way up had changed. Some had multiplied. Others vanished. I passed a cairn I remembered placing that morning. Only now, it had a small mirror resting on top. My reflection showed my back. I turned fast. Nothing behind me. Just the growing sound of footsteps, not my own. I made it halfway down before I realized I'd passed the same dead tree 3 times. Its bark had peeled in the shape of a jagged crescent, like a mouth caught mid-scream. And each time I passed it, there was something new nearby. First a torn strip of film hanging from a branch. Then my lens cap lying in the dirt. And finally, my own photograph pinned to the trunk with a sharpened stick. I hadn't printed anything. I hadn't even left the ridge with my gear. Yet there it was, a photo of me, walking down this trail, taken from behind. The timestamp on the corner was 3 minutes in the future. I tried to run after that. The trail kept slipping sideways, like the forest tilted just enough to steer me wrong. I could feel eyes on my back not imagined, but palpable, like breath grazing the edge of skin. The path narrowed until I was squeezing between trees that hadn't been there before. They grew closer together, tighter, their bark slick and wet. And as I pressed forward, something brushed my shoulder. I turned just a branch. I told myself, just wind. But the fog curling in now moved like it had weight. It clung to my legs, slowed my steps. and carried sound in strange, broken echoes. Somewhere behind me, I heard a shutter click. That's when I knew it wasn't just watching me. It was following, photographing, learning, mimicking. I pulled out my phone and snapped a shot in desperation, just to see if I could catch whatever was behind me. But the screen showed something else. An image of myself from 10 feet away. Standing still, eyes open wide, mouth shut tight. The background didn't match where I stood. It was back on the ridge, taken before I'd even begun my descent. My battery dropped from 72% to black as the image froze. I stumbled into a clearing I didn't remember, ringed with low stones and warped stumps. At its center, a wooden frame stood upright like a door with no walls. Through it, the woods looked normal, brighter, real. But stepping closer, I saw something off. A reflection hung in the space between the posts, not of the forest, but of me. Still, eyes closed, then open. It smiled. The last thing I remember clearly is stepping back from the frame and feeling hands on my shoulders, gentle, firm. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat locked. My legs folded beneath me. The world went sharp, then quiet, then black. I woke in my car, parked back at the trailhead, drenched in sweat, boots caked in mud, and my hands stained with what looked like old developer fluid. My phone was on the seat beside me, its screen dark, but the camera roll was full hundreds of photos, all of them of me, sleeping, walking, standing just out of focus in the trees. Some were from angles I don't understand, like they were taken from above or from inside the trees themselves. I don't take photos anymore. I haven't touched a lens since, because every so often, when I pass a reflective surface glass, water, even a black window, I catch a glimpse of myself, standing perfectly still, watching me. Just a second too long before the image blinks away. And sometimes, I swear, I hear it in the dark, the shutter, waiting. They called it a recovery mission, but we all knew better. A family of 3 had gone missing near Timberjaw Creek in northern Georgia, tent still zipped, campfire still warm, but no sign of the hikers. My name's Thomas Lee, 38 Senior Ranger with the Chattahoochee Forest Service. I'd done missing person cases before. Most ended in twisted ankles, wrong turns, or too much bourbon. This one was different. There were no trails leading away from the site. No scuffle, no wildlife prints. Just silence, thick and wrong, and a cold front that hadn't been forecast. The camp sat in a shallow ravine, pine needles dense and undisturbed around the perimeter. I walked the perimeter twice. Everything was where it should be, except the footprints. There were boot prints outside the main tent, spaced like someone pacing, not in confusion, but precision. 4 steps left, 4 steps right, turn, repeat. As if someone had been waiting. The tread matched none of the missing hikers, but it matched mine. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, that maybe another ranger had arrived before me, left prints without logging them. But the station confirmed I was the first on site. That's when I noticed the mask half buried under the firewood stack. Hand-stitched, old leather, shaped like a human face but without features. No mouth, no eyes, just soft contours. It hadn't been burned. It was placed there. I bagged it, tagged it, and started combing the surrounding woods for signs of passage. That's when I found the cameras. Not mine, not the family's. Motion-activated trail cams, mounted higher than any human could comfortably reach without gear. 4 of them, all pointing at the camp from different angles, all recording. I took the SD cards back to my station laptop and played the footage. Each one had hours of blank forest, waving trees, until around 3:17 a.m., when something would shift, the feed would shake, the screen would flicker. Then a figure, always just barely in frame, always facing the lens, never moving, never clear, just standing there. The strangest part, the timestamp glitches. The videos would jump from 3:17 to 3:17, same second, over and over, as if time itself didn't move while that thing was present. On the final clip, I saw myself, not from the back, from the front. I stood in the center of the shot, head tilted, except I hadn't been there. I hadn't even been on site yet when the recording was made, and whoever it was didn't have a face. I returned to the ravine the next day, hoping to make sense of it. But the camp was wrong now. The tent had collapsed in on itself. The firewood was ash, and the pacing footprints were gone. Instead, a new set had formed, wider apart, heavier, as if someone much taller had been circling the site. At the center, burned into the soil, was the outline of the mask, like someone had pressed it there while it was glowing hot. That night, back in the ranger station, I heard pacing outside the barracks window, slow, measured. 4 steps left, 4 steps right. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the yard. Nothing. No prints, no sign of movement. But when I turned back to the station door, it was open. Just slightly. I always lock it behind me. Always. And on the table just inside, right where I'd left my badge, was the mask, clean, dry, smiling. I didn't touch the mask. I locked the station, double-checked the windows, and stayed up the rest of the night with my service pistol in hand, watching shadows slide across the walls. Nothing came. Nothing moved. But the next morning, the mask was gone. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, just an empty table and a hollow stillness in the room, like something had exhaled and slipped back into the woods before dawn. The investigation stayed open, but there were no leads. The hikers' identities faded into paper files, names I barely remember now. But I still see their faces sometimes, half-lit in memory. I returned to Timberjaw a week later, against orders. I told myself I just needed to confirm the terrain, that maybe I'd find something the search parties missed. But I brought a camera this time. Motion activated, mounted high. I pointed it not at the trail, but at myself where I stood near the ravine's edge. I wanted to see if it would catch the thing I hadn't dared name. The footage was brief. I reviewed it the next day in town. At 3:17 a.m., the camera flared white for a single frame. When the image returned, I was no longer alone. A tall figure stood 5 feet behind me, not moving, blank-faced, wearing the same ranger uniform I had on. In the next frame, it was gone. I don't remember feeling anything. No cold wind, no sound. But the hair on my neck had stood straight up for hours that night, without reason. The sightings grew after that. Reports from hikers, someone following just out of sight. A tall man, silent, staring. No face, just the outline of one. They described his uniform in a perfect detail, down to the number stitched on the collar mine. but they always saw him walking away. And when they followed, the forest shifted, trails repeated, campsites reappeared in reverse. One kid said his sleeping bag was zipped from the outside when he woke up. Another found his journal rewritten, every page identical, except the final line. Don't look at it too long. I kept trying to explain it. Copycat behavior, local lore, pranksters. But I stopped denying it the night I reviewed one last trail cam clip. It showed my truck parked at the station, me stepping out, me looking up at the camera and waving. But I was already inside when the camera triggered, watching the footage, alone. The man on the screen, he had no face, just the shape of one stretched tight and smooth, like skin pulled too far. But he waved like he knew the camera was there, like he knew I was watching. Since then, I've stopped logging hikes past dusk. I stopped going into Timberjaw altogether, but that hasn't stopped the thing from leaving signs. I find my gear moved, my boots facing the door when I wake. My own journal sometimes has pages I didn't write long. Slow loops of words I recognize, but don't remember putting down. Sometimes I wake up with dirt under my nails and pine needles in my bed, like I've been walking in the woods again, like I've followed myself back. Last week, I got a call from a new recruit who'd just finished his first solo patrol up near the creek. He sounded shaken, said he passed a man in a ranger's coat who didn't say a word, just stared at him from behind a veil of fog. When I asked what he saw exactly, he said the man looked like a mirror, same posture, same stance, but no face. He walked just like you, the recruit said, like he knew where I was going. I didn't say anything. I just hung up the phone and sat in the dark, listening to my boots shift near the door, though I hadn't moved them. The mask hasn't returned. But some nights, I find myself outside without knowing how I got there, facing the woods. Still, breath slow, and I swear I can feel my own eyes, watching me from the tree line. I ran away from home the week before my 17th birthday. Nothing cinematic about it, no screaming match, no slam door, just silence. The kind that builds for years until it's too thick to breathe. My name's Naomi Brooks. I grew up in rural Alabama, just east of the Appalachian Plateau, where the roads dead end into tobacco fields and nobody waves unless they know your grandmother. I walked until my legs ached and hitched 2 short rides before finding a derelict barn outside a place called Clover Pass. The roof was caved in at one end, but the loft was dry and smelled more like old hay than rot. It would do for the night. I laid out my coat in the corner, curled against my backpack, and let the dark close around me. It wasn't until I started drifting off that I heard the singing. Soft, drawn out like a lullaby, but wrong. The melody felt familiar, almost comforting, until I realized it was playing backward. The notes were inverted, dragging each word into something warped and wet. I sat up fast, heart pounding, but the barn was empty. Still, the voice kept coming, not from outside, but beneath the floorboards. I froze, not because I was afraid, at least. Not yet, but because the tune was one my mother used to hum. Only she never sang the words, just a quiet hum while she peeled potatoes or folded clothes. Lost in memory. Hearing it now, reversed and wrong, felt like someone had turned my own childhood inside out and left it on repeat. I climbed down from the loft and pressed my ear to the packed dirt. Nothing. Just the brittle cold of autumn ground. But when I turned back, my coat had been folded, neatly, like it used to be when I was little. I should have left then. Should have walked through the night, blistered feet or not. But a strange calm set in, like I wasn't allowed to panic yet. I sat by the door, knees to chest, and waited for the first hint of sunrise. That's when I noticed the cross, a wooden one, maybe 2 feet tall, driven into the far wall where the boards had split. It hadn't been there earlier. I'd have seen it. But now it sat squarely in view. And hanging from it by a nail was a child's doll, headless, arm stitched backward, dress crusted with something dark. The lullaby began again. Slower this time, the same inverted melody. But now the words came through. Lay thee down, not to wake. The voice wasn't mine, but I knew it. Not memory, not mimicry. Something deeper. I covered my ears and bit the inside of my cheek to ground myself. When I opened my eyes, there were small footprints in the dust, barefoot, no bigger than a toddler's, circling me once, then disappearing into the shadows of the loft. I didn't sleep that night. By dawn, the footprints had vanished, but outside the barn, where my boots had been, there were 2 sets of shoes, mine and a smaller pair, old, scuffed, tied tight like a parent might do. Neither were wet with dew. Neither had laces undone. I slipped mine on and walked out without a sound. But the barn didn't let me go clean. 50 feet into the field, I turned back, and there, in the loft window, was a face, not a child's, mine, watching, expressionless. I don't remember reaching the road, or the car that picked me up. Just that when I finally opened my backpack that evening, nestled between my clothes was a music box I'd never seen before. Painted with roses, the same melody, played backward. I should have thrown the music box away, left it on the roadside, buried it deep in a ditch, anything. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe part of me hoped it would make sense if I studied it long enough. It was small, hand-painted in chipped enamel. The roses faded to a shade too dark to be read. The crank turned slow, resisting the way you'd expect if it hadn't been touched in years. But when I wound it the first time, the melody played clear, perfect, pristine, and in reverse. I set it down and stepped back, and for a moment, I swore I heard something humming along, just out of sync, like a second box inside the wall of my motel room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tried. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd wake an hour later with the same weight in my chest, like something was standing just behind the curtain. The television flickered once around midnight, the screen jumping to static, then to black. I hadn't turned it on, and when I reached for the remote, it was gone. I found it hours later, tucked into my shoe. I never do that. I don't sleepwalk. At least I didn't. The second morning, I opened the journal I kept during the trip. A few pages had been filled in. Same pen, same handwriting, but not mine. The words were repetitions, phrases I didn't remember writing. She sleeps like me now. Turn the song around. The barn breathes when no one listens. Every line ended with a dash and the initial N, my initial, but not written the way I sign. This was tighter, more childlike. I booked a bus out of Clover Pass that afternoon. Heading back east, I told myself it was done, that whatever I had seen or thought I'd seen was tied to that place and nothing more. But that night, at a rest stop an hour from the next town, I stepped into the bathroom and stopped cold. On the mirror, drawn in condensation, were backward letters Key W-Ton Strawcab 8 Nial. I wiped the glass clean, heart in my throat. No one else had been inside. At my next stop, I tried to give the box away, left it in a donation bin, wrapped in a scarf, hoping it would just vanish from my life. I walked 3 blocks to a cafe, ordered coffee, and opened my bag. It was there, unwrapped, dry, with the crank already turned halfway. On the 4th night, I stopped hearing the lullaby aloud, but it stayed in my head, always reversed, sometimes slower, sometimes too fast. I began to lose time, or I'd blink and find myself in a different room. The music box started moving to new places under my pillow, inside the motel fridge, even in the front seat of a bus I hadn't boarded yet. Each time, I'd find something beside it, a button, a shoelace, a single tooth. I began to think they were gifts or warnings. The worst part came last. I woke to knocking at my door, slow and even. I didn't answer, but the knocking continued until it matched the rhythm of the lullaby. When it stopped, I opened the door to silence. No one in the hallway, just a trail of child-sized footprints in the worn motel carpet, leading away. In the middle of the trail sat the doll. Headless, same dress, same dark stain. I finally went home after that. Told no one, never unpacked. I locked the box in a drawer and sealed it with duct tape and prayer. But even now, sometimes in the dead of night, I wake to humming. And sometimes, when the light flickers, I see her. Not a child, not a ghost, just me. Sitting in a corner of the room, lips unmoving, eyes wide, and breath falling in sync with the backward lullaby neither of us sings. I was assigned to the old strip mine outside of Gilberton, Pennsylvania, just a formality. They said, routine inspection of abandoned power lines and old transmitters that still, somehow, kept sending faint pulses through the air. My name's Rick Geller, journeyman electrician, 45, mostly contracted out for remote sites and forgotten infrastructure. Places that don't exist on public records anymore, but still need someone to check a box once or twice a year. The coal seams had long since collapsed, and the mine itself had been sealed decades ago. But the radio tower perched above it still blinked once every 7 seconds, like a heartbeat no one bothered to shut off. I was told the place hadn't had power in 15 years. They were wrong. The day was clear, bright skies, cold wind, nothing unusual. But just after noon, a low rumble started up in the west. Not thunder, not exactly. It rolled in too slow, like a train dragging something behind it. I checked the weather, no storms for hundreds of miles. Yet the sound grew louder, tighter, coiling around the ridge like it was circling something. That's when I saw him, a man, standing alone on the old coal mound, far from the road. He didn't move, just stood there with his back to me. I called out, no response. I waved, still nothing. But when the thunder came again, louder this time, he lifted his head slightly, as if listening. Then it stopped, and so did he, vanished in the blink of an eye. No dust trail, no path, just gone. I chalked it up to nerves. Long drive, too much caffeine. But when I reached the base of the tower, I found something that didn't belong. An old service jacket, faded navy blue, on the breast, Geller. My name, my stitching. But I'd never worn that style, not once in my life. Inside the pocket was a crumpled inspection form, dated October 26, 1914. Same date as the original mine collapse. Same day I'd arrived. The ground beneath the tower felt unstable. I kept getting static through the radio, even though I hadn't keyed the mic. Voices crackled in and out, low and clipped, like an old dispatch loop. Rick status, Rick. But it wasn't from the service channel. It was coming from inside the tower. I climbed halfway up to check the junction box. All wires dead. But when I looked out across the ridge, I saw the man again. Closer this time. Still not moving. But now I could see he was wearing a helmet. Coal miners cracked down one side. I descended fast. I didn't want to be up there when the thunder came again. And it did, sharp and close, like it had dropped straight down from above me. The sound hit so hard it knocked my tools off my belt. I fell to one knee, ears ringing. And when I looked up, he was standing 10 feet away. Still, hands at his sides, no face visible. Just the outline of something. Wrong. A shape behind the helmet, shifting slightly, like smoke trapped in glass. I blinked and he was gone. Again. I returned to my truck, slammed the doors, and tried to radio out. Static. I turned the ignition. Dead. The entire console blinked twice, then blacked out. On the passenger seat sat a hard hat. Mine. Except I'd left mine in the bed of the truck. This one was cracked. Same break. Same dirt-streaked ridge along the top. As I stared, the radio flared back to life. No input, just a single, deafening sound thunder. Played backward. I left the tower without finishing the inspection. No one at the department questioned it when I reported electrical interference and unstable terrain. They'd heard worse. I kept the rest to myself, the man. The thunder. The helmet I never brought. But something followed me home. I noticed it first in the silence. That strange pause just before weather shifts, when the wind dies and the world waits. It hung around my apartment like a curtain pulled too tight. My electronics flickered at random. Light bulbs hummed even when off. One night, my phone buzzed with a voicemail I hadn't received. I played it. Nothing but a slow, distant rumble. Thunder that never quite arrived. Sleep came harder each night. I'd wake up with dirt on my sheets, red dust beneath my fingernails. Once, I found my boots by the door, muddy, laced wrong, like someone else had worn them. I started recording myself at night, thinking maybe I was sleepwalking. The footage played normal for the first 2 hours. Then, just after 3:17 a.m., the screen would static, then clear to show me standing in the middle of the room, staring straight into the camera, not moving, not blinking, just waiting. But I never remembered leaving bed. A week later, I got a delivery, no label, just a box wrapped in twine. Inside was the inspection form from 1914. My name, again. Different signature, but mine. All the same. Beneath it, a photo, faded, cracked. A group of miners standing beside the original radio tower. One figure in the back was circled in pencil. His face was blurred, but I could see the outline of the helmet. Cracked. And scrawled in the corner were 4 words, "He doesn't leave alone." I started hearing it again, the thunder. Not outside, but from the walls, through the floorboards, sometimes low, sometimes sharp. One night, I opened my window for air and caught the silhouette of a figure standing across the street beneath the lamplight. Same build, same stance, same helmet. I blinked. The street was empty, but my hallway light snapped on by itself. At the end of the hall, A dark smear on the wall in the shape of a hand. Not blood, not paint, just black. Like something burned its shadow into plaster. I tried to leave town, packed my truck, drove east. Didn't stop until I hit Maryland. But halfway through the mountains, a storm rolled in, no warning, no wind, just thunder. Rolling in low and slow. My radio cut out, my headlights dimmed. And standing in the middle of Route 50, clear as anything, was the man. He didn't move, didn't flinch as I slammed the brakes. I veered into a ditch, heart pounding. But when I climbed out, he was gone. Back home, everything felt quieter. Too quiet. My clock stopped at 3:17. Every night, I'd wake to the smell of wet coal and static on the air. And sometimes, just before sleep takes me, I hear him pacing. 4 steps, pause, 4 more. I've memorized the rhythm now. I don't check the windows, I don't turn on the lights. I just listen and wait. The man in the thunder doesn't knock. He waits. And when you finally open the door, you realize he's not there to take you. He's there to replace you.